everybody. Welcome back. This is episode 69 of Dobber Prospects Radio. I'm your host, Peter Harling. Coming up on this episode, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Wisconsin at Penn State game that happened Halloween and November 1st. Didn't get to go to either game, very, very sadly, but I did watch them both on TV on the Big Ten Network. I got to talk about some players that stood out there, some drafted ones, but particularly some free agent players who you might want to look at towards the end of the season for your fantasy rosters. And then doing a little forward looking, the Super Series between Canada and Russia is set to begin tonight. Game 1 is today, November 4th. It starts out east this time, and the Q will travel through Ontario and end up in the Dub. I'll be at 2 games this weekend, November 7th and 11th in Kitchener and London. I plan on heading out for a road trip and taking a bunch of games this weekend in Western Ontario. So I'll be talking a lot about particularly the Russian players for today's episode. Some players to look at. I'll start there. And then after the first 2 games tonight and tomorrow in the queue, I'll talk about some Quebec players and some Russian players that stood out. And then, of course, I'll have a lot more to say after having watched some live games next weekend in Ontario. So starting off, let's do the NCAA talk. Couple of huge games in Happy Valley between Wisconsin and Penn State. So Wisconsin is the 7th ranked. Penn State is, I think, 12th ranked teams in the NCAA. Wisconsin is a younger team. They've got some freshmen and sophomore players that really stand out on that team. Players like Alex Turcotte and Cole Caufield, Keandre Miller are the headliners on that roster. And Penn State is a little bit of an older team. They got a lot of seniors, some undrafted free agents, players I'll be focusing on there. So starting with Wisconsin, of course, Cole Caufield came into this little mini series, head-to-head game, on fire, lighting it up as everyone kind of expected that he would. And I'd say he didn't really disappoint, but he kind of did. I mean, he scored a goal and had an assist in the 2 games. And the goal that he scored was on the Friday night game on Halloween. It was pretty good. Nice little nice release on his shot. Ripped it over the goalie's glove. Kind of a little bit of a stutter step sort of change up that I think caught the defender and the goalie off guard. I don't think the goalie was expecting him to shoot it when he did. So a pretty typical Cole Caufield goal. He showed what he's pretty well known for, getting into open ice, finding himself in the right place at the right time to receive a pass or collect a rebound off the side of the net. In the second game particularly, he didn't really stand out very much to me, despite the fact that he had an assist in that game. The other player who I personally was really interested in watching from Wisconsin was Sean Dhooghe, and I kind of came away wanting after watching Dhooghe. So what I like about Dhooghe is, despite the fact that he's tremendously undersized, he's got a super high compete level and a motor that just doesn't quit. And I found that created some scoring opportunities for him, but he did not convert on them. So despite the fact that he's got a great hustle and a motor, his skill level is just not really high enough to compensate for his lack of size. He was ineffective despite trying his hardest in some physical competitions. I mean, granted, he going up against guys like Nikita Pavlychev, who's Zdeno Cherabeg, is difficult for him. And now, while that might not be fair, it is what it is. So not sure that I see a lot of NHL upside with Sean Dhooghe, despite how much I want that to happen. One player that did stand out to me, who I didn't really have any information on, although I know more about his brother, is Roman Ahcan. So he is in his sophomore season with Wisconsin. He is 20-year-old, free agent. He's a sophomore, 5'9", 161, so he's a 99 born. His freshman season was kind of unspectacular. 18-19 season, he had 37 games played, 6 goals, 9 assists for 15 points. He also had 58 penalty minutes. So far in his sophomore season, he's playing on typically a third line pairing. In the first game, he was... Where was he? Lined up on the first line with Tariq Baker and Sean Dhooghe, if you want to call that their first line. And he so far this season has 7 games played, and he's got 9 points, 2 goals and 7 assists, 25 penalty minutes already, and 23 of them came from the first game in this series, which he only played 1 because he ended up being suspended for the follow-up game on the Friday night. So he had a really big hit on Smirnov, which took them both out of the game. Smirnov to injury and Ahcan for 23 minutes worth of penalties and misconducts. So it was a play where the puck was dumped into the corner and they were both going after it. And he kind of pulled the Forsberg. Before either of them had played the puck, he had a preemptive check on Smirnov, who I don't think was really ready for it because they hadn't engaged on the puck yet. I mean, it was close, but they weren't on it. So I think that is part of the reason why they were suspended. And the other part is he comes at him from the side and he's low and raises into Smirnov. And I guess you could make the argument, I haven't watched the replay minutia, but you could make the argument that its initial point of contact is the head. So it's a hard, violent hit on Smirnov. He's not really ready or prepared for it, and he lied on the ice for a while after that hit, was slow to get up, and skated off the ice under his own power, fortunately, but left the game, didn't come back. It's a big scrum, and the game got really chippy after that. So anyway, I really liked what I saw from Roman Ahcan despite that. He's a really good two-way player, and he's a plus 11 player so far this season. And I did a little research on him. I found an article that had an interesting point that at even strength with Ahcan, they have outscored their opponents 8-0, and at even strength without Ahcan on the ice, they've been outscored 18-9. So that's a pretty significant difference in his impact on the game. He's been a solid penalty killer for them too, generating scoring chances while shorthanded. So he's a free agent player who I think is someone worth noting. Some other players from Wisconsin, Linus Weisbach, Buffalo Sabres prospect. He had some moments that were pretty impressive. Alex Turcotte, of course, Los Angeles Kings first rounder freshman. He had a couple nice stick handling moves and passes, but overall pretty unimpressive. Owen Lindmark, he's a freshman from Florida, drafted by the Panthers. I thought he had a good game. Keandre Miller, of course, sophomore New York Rangers, first round pick from 2 years ago. Very impressive. He's going to have an impact at the NHL level when he gets there. He's just able to dominate plays both ways. He's a converted forward to a defenseman, so he's only been playing defense for a few years. So once he finishes learning how to play defense at the college level, there might be a little bit of pro adjustment, as the pro level is a little bit more skilled than the college level. So, but once he's fully developed, I think the New York Rangers got themselves a stud on their hands there. Tyler Inamoto, another Florida Panthers prospect, I thought had some moments where he looked pretty good. Other than that, no one really stood out for Wisconsin. They seemed kind of a little bit outmatched as a younger team going up against a senior team. Penn State was easily more impressive, winning both games. So let's talk about some Penn State players. Their top line was great. Nathan Sucese and Brandon Biro are two senior free agents, and they were very impressive, and I think that they'll be near the leading scores at the end of the season this year in the NCAA, and they'll be garnering all kinds of free agent attention. So let's start with Nate Sucese. He is a speedy competitive player. He was invited to the Boston Bruins development camp, and he was invited to the Nashville Predators camp the season before that, and he was very impressive. He's a versatile, speedy, competitive, tenacious kind of player, and so far this season he's been on fire. 13 points in 7 games with 4 goals and 9 assists. So he kind of is drawing comparisons to Bruins' other free agent college signee, Carson Kuhlman. So look for him to sign a contract once this season is over. He's sporting a 1.86 point per game and could be a Hobey Baker finalist, if not a contestant. His line mate, Brandon Biro, spelt Biro, he's the captain for Penn State this season. He's a senior as well. He's a free agent. He was at the Pittsburgh Penguins development camp along with his teammate, Nikita Pavlychev. So he's been steadily improving throughout his college career. So I haven't seen his college career. I'm just starting to watch the college games more recently. But as a freshman, he posted 0.51 points per game. And then in his sophomore season, he improved that to 0.84 points per game. In his junior season, he eclipsed the point per game mark, 1.87. And this being his senior season, he's 1.71 points per game. So he's a steadily improving player. 7 games so far this season, 5 goals, 7 assists, 12 points. He's only gone 2 games where he was held off the scoreboard. So he's a complete player. I like his complete package of skill. Hockey high IQ is very high. He's the captain. He's a very coachable player. From some of the comments that I read, his play has been very consistent. He's the kind of player you can put out in any situation. So I think his game translates well into pro hockey. So he's a player I think that'll also be garnering a lot of attention. Peyton Jones, the goaltender for Penn State. Don't really know much about him, but I thought he played a really good game. I thought that he made the easy saves look easy, and he made the hard saves look not hard. I thought that he tracked the puck well. He was in position square to the shooter a lot. Didn't think that he overcompensated very much. I saw that from Wisconsin's goalie, Daniil Lebedev. I thought he kind of, a couple of times, really moved laterally too far. So while most of the time he did make the save, the puck hit him as he was going by from one side to the other, as opposed to stopping in front of the shooter and squaring up to the puck. So I liked what I saw from Peyton Jones. So I did a little research on him. I see that he's he's a senior, 23 years old, 6'4", 209. So he's got great size for a goalie. He's a free agent as well, so he's never been drafted. His first season in the NCAA has been his best so far. His freshman season was in 16-17. He made the all-rookie team, NCAA Big Ten tournament champion, and tournament MVP. And then I guess Penn State has been kind of up and down since then. He's been playing pretty consistently, so the coach is pretty loyal to him. His rookie season, he has 36 games played, 23-10-2 was his record, and a 2.6 goals against average and 904 save percentage. So those were his freshman stats. I think he's going to put out some really impressive stats this season as a senior and playing on a really strong team. Penn State was very impressive. So I'm not sure that he's got NHL upside, but he should certainly garner some pro attention once this season wraps up. Player who I was interested in watching as well is Colorado Avalanche prospect Denis Smirnov. So he's a senior as well. This is his final year. He's a drafted player. His Fantrax ownership is 0%. He was drafted by the Colorado Avalanche in 2017, 6th round pick, 156 overall. So he's 5'9", 185, so he's a little bit on the small size, but not too bad. So he's playing on a top line as a senior, but he's been in decline for 3 years in his college career. His freshman season, again, was his best season. I guess Penn State had a really good year 4 years ago, and have kind of struggled the last 2. Anyhow, in his freshman season, 39 games played, 47 points, 1.21 point per game. So he's been on the exact opposite trend of Brandon Biro. His sophomore season went down to 0.9 points per game and then 0.59 points per game in his junior year last year. This season, he's back up to the point a game clip so far with 6 points in 6 games, but he's kind of struggled with some injuries. And as I mentioned, he was injured in the Thursday night game on Halloween at the hands of Ahcan. So if you were thinking about putting Smirnov on your watch list, I would err on the side of caution there and perhaps consider you to look a little harder. Some more players from Penn State. Another free agent would be junior player Alex Limoges. You might have heard me mention him on previous editions of the DPR podcast because he led the league in scoring last season as a sophomore with 50 points. He tied Taro Hirose, who was a senior and has since moved on and signed with the Detroit Red Wings and is playing in the NHL and is looking a bit of all right up there. So Alex Limoges, so far this season, isn't off to quite the same sort of offensive pace he was last year. He's got 5 points in 7 games, 2 goals, 3 assists. And that might be in part just because Penn State's offense is just so spread out. You've got the top line of Sucese and Biro. You've got a line with Nikita Pavlychev and Aarne Talivite, Pittsburgh Penguins and New Jersey Devils prospects, who I spoke about on previous episodes as well. You've got Limoges and Evan Barratt, who both were at the top of the league in scoring last year, playing on yet another line. So there's just so much depth on Penn State. They're such a great team. If they play a game later on this season that's a little bit closer to home than Pennsylvania, I'd absolutely love to go on a road trip. So Alex Limoges is another player who's a free agent. He's 22 years old. He's got size, 6'1", 201 pounds. After his major breakout last season, look for him to follow that up this year. And I'm not sure if he's prepared to turn pro and forego his senior season. He's got 1 more year of college eligibility available to him. So we'll see what he does. He will certainly have NHL teams talking to him at the end of the season, perhaps making an offer. So his line mate, Evan Barratt, he's a junior Chicago Blackhawks, so he also has 1 more season of eligibility. So either of these or both of these players may or may not be back. Nikita Pavlychev, I spoke about him. He was pretty impressive. I didn't like how he skated. He's a lumbering looking skater. But when you're 6'9" or 7, whatever he is, he's a giant. Your strides are so much longer. You can move around a little bit quicker. His acceleration is wanting. But what he did do very well, I thought, was read the play. It took him a little bit. He needs a bit of time and space to read the play, but if you give him an opportunity to settle the puck down and lift his head up and assess the situation, he made some really nice plays. He set up Sucese, I believe it was, with a nice slap kind of pass from the point into the crease. And it could have been Limoges. I don't remember who scored it anyways. And that was an easy deflection one-timer kind of shot from the slot that led to a goal. He had a couple of really nice plays similar to that throughout. Aarne Talivite, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more. I was more impressed with what I saw from him at the World Juniors with Finland than what I was in these 2 games. He didn't play poorly. But he played at a role that would indicate to me he's clearly more of a bottom 6 NHL player than a top 6. On defense, Cole Caufield is a Los Angeles Kings prospect. He's a junior with Penn State. He is their number 1 defenseman. He looked pretty good. I liked what I saw from him. Clayton Phillips, I thought, a Pittsburgh Penguins junior prospect as well, had a very impressive game. As did Alex Stevens. He's a free agent junior as well. So those are some players that from the college hockey games that I got to watch last week, I thought were fantasy relevant. Players that you might want to take some time and source them out in your pool, see if they're available, and the free agents, you want to put them on your watch list and keep an eye on them. All right, so changing gears now, I want to shift and talk about a little Subway. It's not called Subway anymore. The Canada-Russia Super Series that's coming up. That starts tonight. First 2 games in Quebec, like I said, November 4th and 5th. The next 2 games, November 7th and 11th in Ontario. And then the 13th and 14th of the games in the Dub. Saskatchewan, I think, is hosting for the Dub this year. So starting with Team Russia. Their roster was just announced the other day, the final roster, and the headliner for sure is Canucks prospect Vasili Podkolzin. So he's 24% Fantrax owned, Canucks first round pick, 10th overall from this past draft in Vancouver. So it's always fun to be, the host city's first round draft choice. You get the royal treatment for sure. Since his draft, it's been well documented that he has 2 years remaining on contract for him to play in Russia with the KHL. He has 0 points in 11 games in the KHL this season. He has been the 13th forward for a lot of games. He's been scratched. His ice time has been extremely limited. The team he plays for is pretty good. So they're a competitive team, and their focus is winning games, not developing prospects for NHL teams. So he's also played 12 games in the VHL, which is the Russian equivalent of the AHL. So in those 12 games, he's got 7 points. And he's also played a couple games in the MHL, which is like the minor junior hockey there. So he has 4 points in 2 games in the MHL. So his 3 leagues that he's played in with limited ice time in the KHL has really kind of rubbed some Canucks fans and probably owners, management, the wrong way. There's been a lot of concern about his deployment and his development. And it's hard in North America here and for Canucks fans to watch KHL games. So this will create an excellent opportunity for him to play prominent minutes against some elite competition. This is an all-star tournament, to say the least. So this is a tremendous opportunity for Podkolzin to showcase himself to Canucks fans and to fantasy owners as well. The 2-year contract, I would, don't bat an eye on that. A lot of the players that were drafted this past summer in Vancouver in the first round a lot of them are 2 years away at the very least anyways. So don't worry about the Russian factor. Speaking of his limited role in Russia this season, I found an interesting quote from Vancouver Canucks player development chief Ryan Johnson. He said, "We don't have control of that," and that being how he's been used in the KHL. But it's definitely something that we're monitoring very close. Blah, 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 blah. And we want to make sure that his process and his ability to develop the way we would like, that he's getting the opportunity to do that. So, that's just basically what he's saying is there's not much we can do about what's happening with his game over in Russia. They don't have any real kind of influence on it. And that's just kind of what comes with the territory when you draft a player that has a KHL contract. You just kind of hope for the best for his deployment. So look for Podkolzin to be getting prime deployment in all 6 games in this tournament. Okay, moving on to another player. This is a draft-eligible player, Rodin Amirov. He's an 18-year-old. So he's a late birthday. He's October 01. So he missed last year's draft by a couple weeks. He's a highly rated prospect for the draft. Hockey Prospect has him ranked 18th. McKeen's has him ranked 19th. And our own Dobber Prospects, Cam Robinson, had him ranked 17th, all in their initial draft rankings. So Amirov is 6 foot 168. He's also under contract in Russia, like Podkolzin, through the 2021 season. He has 1 assist in 11 KHL games under his belt this season. So again, another example of a young player who's not getting much love in the KHL. In the 3 VHL games he's played this season, which is like the Russian AHL, he has 2 assists, and he's got 3 points in 3 games in the MHL. He's got some international experience. He's got 9 points in 7 games in the U18 tournament from 18 and 19, where he helped Russia win the silver. So while this season his games played has been a little bit limited, this is another opportunity for him to hopefully get in some prominent minutes in these games. Now, the challenge with that is the Russian coach, Vasili Podkolzin. It's been very well documented that he strongly favors the older players, the 19-year-old players in the U20 tournaments. So Amirov is 18, so he's a year younger than a lot of the players on this roster. But this isn't the World Juniors. There's not as much on the line here. It's a showcase exhibition tournament where, Canada and Russia have an opportunity to gauge some of the players who will be competing for roles on the World Junior. That's really what this tournament is all about. So hopefully, Rodin Amirov gets a little bit more ice time and deployment than if he makes the World Junior team for Russia would maybe get over there. But it's certainly an opportunity for him to showcase himself to North American scouts and North American fantasy hockey owners who want to know have a firsthand opinion on what this first round pick, his potential and his upside is. So I highly recommend keeping an eye on Rodin Amirov from Russia in this tournament. The next player from Russia that I want to talk about will be their likely starting goalie for the majority of the games. That's Amir Miftakhov. I really don't know this last name pronunciation. I apologize. So he's a 19-year-old. He's a free agent, NHL-wise. He was a 2018 draft prospect, and he went undrafted there and again last year in Vancouver. And he's now playing in the VHL. And as I mentioned with Amirov about the coach Vasili Podkolzin, he likes the older players, and that's what we have here, is an older 19-year-old goalie. So he'll be playing to try and make the Russian World Junior, and he'll be competing in the World Junior roster, I would think, with Yaroslav Askarov, who is the superstar goaltender coming up for the draft, who a lot of people are pegging to be not only a first-round pick, which is rare for goalies these days, but like a top 10 at least pick in the draft. Yaroslav Askarov is a big deal. He's not playing in the Russia-Canada series here starting tonight. He did not make the team or the trip. He's playing, I believe, in a U17 tournament right now. So he's playing in a different tournament for Russia somewhere. So Amir Miftakhov, Miftakhov, is the spelling on his name if you want to try your best to pronounce it. It'll help after we watch Sportsnet broadcast tell me how to pronounce it correctly tonight. Anyhow, he's a goalie. You might want to keep an eye out. He's undrafted, 19-year-old. I believe he's got another go at the draft before he becomes a free agent, so he could be potentially picked in Montreal. Moving on, Russian player Ivan Morozov. So he is a drafted player. The Vegas Golden Knights picked him in the 2018 draft in the second round, 61st overall, and he is only 2% Fantrax owned. So here is a potential sleeper fantasy hockey prospect you might want to put on your radar. He's a second round pick, 2% owned from 1 year's removed draft. So he is a center, 19-year-old, 6'1", 196, so no concerns about size there. He's played entirely this season in the VHL, where he's got 6 points in 10 games, so that's not too shabby. So here's a player that I think you want to keep an eye out for. Certainly someone who will be competing for a World Junior roster with Russia as well. Another similar player is NHL drafted Danil Savunov. He's 5'10", 163. He is a draft choice of the Arizona Coyotes this past draft in Montreal. So he's 18 years old. 6th round, 174th overall. He's got 13 points in 19 games in the VHL. So he's a player whose NHL rights have been drafted and owned and unsigned, but you can take a look and watch him in these games and see if you want to own him. So those are some of the players who are coming from Russia for Team Russia, and I know very little about any of these guys. What I do know a little bit more about is some of the players who will be joining from the CHL ranks. So starting with and ending with the Q, there are 4 players, and I spoke about them on a previous episode, but I'm just going to recap on them. So first and foremost, Dmitri Zavgorodiny, Calgary Flames prospect from the 2018 draft, 7th round, 198th overall, only 2% Fantrax owned, is tearing up the Q with Rimouski. He plays on a line with first overall ranked prospect for this coming draft, Alexis Lafreniere, who incidentally is hurt and won't be playing in these 2 games tonight and tomorrow for the Q, which is extremely disappointing. Back to Zavgorodiny. So he's been playing on a line with Lafreniere and Cedric Parr, former Boston Bruins pick. As I said, lighting up with 2 points per game. He's got 36 points in 18 games. And he played in this tournament last year with Russia. And he's got a lot of international experience with Russia as well. He's played on the U20, the U18. He played for them in the Hlinka. So a lot of international experience. 2 years in North America under his belt after this season. And so I think the Flames might have found themselves some very good value from the 7th round with Zavgorodiny. Still, he's playing with Lafreniere, and he's older than a lot of the players he's playing with in the CHL. So once he turns pro, hopefully next season, look for him to have a season of development in the AHL. Next player is Cape Breton import player Yegor Sokolov. So he is a big power winger, 6'4", 240 pounds, very heavy, 19-year-old. He is a June 2000 undrafted from the 2018 draft, so 0% Fantrax owned because he's never had his NHL rights owned, so he's in his draft plus 2 season. This is his 3rd year in the CHL, which is kind of rare for import players. They usually play 1 or 2. So his first season in the Q was 17-18, where he had 42 points in 64 games. And then he followed that up in 18-19 with a modest improvement, 68 games, 30 goals, 27 assists, 57 points. And so far this season, the 19-20 year, he has exploded with 18 games, 14 goals, 20 assists, 34 points in 18 games. He is a plus 17 player. He was invited to the Columbus Blue Jackets development camp this summer and on a tryout, and was not offered a contract and was returned back to junior for the start of the season, but was very impressive there. So a couple of things to watch for with Yegor Sokolov. One, his shot. It's a very heavy shot. He's a bit of a goal scorer with a nose for the net. Gets a lot of his weight behind that shot. And he's not afraid to use his size too. Uses that very effectively to protect the puck and create separation and turnovers and steal pucks. The other thing to watch for Sokolov is his skating. Again, the term heavy could be applied to it. He's a heavy skater. He's very slow-footed, doesn't move up and down the ice very, very fast. So that's something that I'll be looking for firsthand, because man, if you're slow, you can't play in the NHL these days. I don't really care how good your shot is or how big you are. So I haven't seen a lot of Sokolov play, but I'll certainly be looking for him tonight and tomorrow as he plays in just the 2 games. So Zavgorodiny, Sokolov, all the players I'm about to talk about are all players from the queue, so they'll only be playing in 2 games. So if you want to see these guys, you got to watch them tonight and tomorrow, because then that's it. So 2 more Russians coming out of the queue into this tournament. Alexei Khavanov, he plays for Moncton. So the second game is in Moncton, so that'll be his home ice game. So this 19-year-old center is a Minnesota Wild prospect. He was drafted in 2018 in the 3rd round, 86th overall. He's 5'11", 198, so his size is okay. He is 3% Fantrax owned, so very low Fantrax ownership. And here is another potential prospect whose 3rd round pick is reasonable. It's fantasy relevant. Let's see. He's in his 3rd season in CHL as well. So his development is coming along quite nicely. He's progressing. His first season was in 17-18, where he played 29 games and had 28 points. His follow-up year was 18-19, where he had 64 games, 25 goals, 49 assists for 74 points. And so far this year in 19-20, in 14 games, he's got 12 goals, 18 assists for 30 points. So his steady development has gone from 0.97 point per game in his first season to 1.16, and now 2.14. This season, he's been on fire. He had a 6-point game on October 13th, and that has started his current 8-game point streak, in which he's got 22 points. He's competed for Russia at the U17s, the U18s, and the U20s, where internationally he's combined for 14 games and 12 points for Russia. So he's going into this tournament hot. So he's a player to watch for. Again, 3% Fantrax owned, 3rd round pick of the Minnesota Wild. That's Alex Khavanov. The final player playing for Russia, coming from the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, is Nikita Alexandrov. He is a St. Louis Blues prospect. He signed his ELC. He is a 2nd round pick from the 2019 draft, 62nd overall. He's 5'11", 185, 19 years old. Also in his 3rd season with the Q. He plays for Charlottetown. So first season there, 66 games, 31 points, 0.47 point per game. Last year, he had 64 games in his draft season, 27 goals, 34 assists, 61 points, 0.95 point per game. So just a shade under that point per game mark, which he's exceeded this year. The 1920 season, he's got 16 games, 12 goals, 8 assists for 20 points. That's 1.13. Nikita Alexandrov is a German-born and raised player, actually. Maintains his Russian citizenship and heritage, but his dad was a pro hockey player who had 1 season in North America in the AHL, but played for the most part pro hockey in Germany. He has no international experience with Russia, so he's a player to watch for. A couple of things to look for with Nikita Alexandrov would be his skating is the hallmark of his game, his acceleration and speed. His offensive ability, is it enough to translate to pro hockey, is what I'll specifically be looking for. He's trending in the right direction, as I mentioned, 0.47 to 0.95 and now 1.13 point per game in the last 3 seasons, is trending in the right direction for sure. The big question mark for his game, though, is his ability without the puck, his physical play, his defensive positioning. Those attributes are questionable for the pro level. So that'll be interesting. He's a 19-year-old, so he should get a prominent role for Russia, but his lack of international experience with that country might work against him politically. So anyhow, those are some players to watch for Russia, and as I mentioned, I'll talk about the Q players after I watch them in the next 2 games. So that's it for this episode. Make sure you watch these Canada-Russia game series. Hope you enjoyed my thoughts on some NCAA prospects from the game I watched over the weekend. If you have anything else you want me to discuss on the podcast about your fantasy team, let me know. Particular leagues, particular players. If you have any questions, go ahead and shoot them right to me. You can catch me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Farling, PHARLING. Or you can hit the podcast at DPR_show. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, hit the 5-star likes, give us a review, share us on social media, all that good stuff. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy the show. Enjoy the hockey game tonight, Quebec and Russia. We'll talk to you on the next episode.